Well, what's up, everybody? Bishop Chris Johnson here, aka the Greatness Coach, bringing you another episode of Pastor Plus. And I'm so excited today that we get to expand this conversation even further. I believe there's a place where ministry and marketplace meet. I believe there's a collaborative work that we can do together, entrepreneurs, pastors, community leaders, learning from each other. And today, I have a very special guest that I'm excited to introduce to everyone. And it is awesome how God brought us together again. I'm telling you, this is again someone I knew from childhood that I didn't know I knew. And God brought us back full circle. So she is an influencer in her own right. She has a very storied background in college basketball, women's basketball. And she is also a producer, a host, a creator of These Three Things podcast. Everybody help me welcome to Pastor Plus, Miss Sharrona Reaves. Sharrona, thank you so much for being on today.
Hey, it's good to be on.
You know, it's such a powerful way God brought us together. I reached out to you. I think my brother helped me remember who you were, and if you don't mind me just telling everybody, I had to remember your childhood name, which was Bebe.
Yes.
And people who are, I'm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and people who are in Murfreesboro will appreciate the fact that you grew up here in Murfreesboro, went to Oakland High School. So, can you tell us a little bit about that and who you are, your journey, and just people who don't know who you are? Can you just kind of let us know who you are for a minute?
Okay. Well, as you said, I am from the borough, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Am proud of it. Did went to Oakland High School. Had a great high school career at Murfreesboro, Oakland. Was on some really great teams back then. I look back now, and it's so awesome to see Murfreesboro flourishing in the athletics world like it is now. It's like, there were a handful of us back then, but like Murfreesboro's kind of become the mecca of Tennessee for talent, which
Yeah,
is
it
pretty cool to
is.
see. I graduated from Oakland, and I went to Fresno State out of high school. A lot of people don't know that. Murfreesboro people would know that, but I went to Fresno State out of high school. I was there for 2 years, did not play my sophomore year because I had torn up my shoulder, and the doctor just would not release me to play. So I medical redshirted. And I was sitting in my dorm room during the NCAA tournament and watching all of these girls that I played AAU basketball with in the NCAA tournament. Like, we all played for Shelbyville Sports Shop, which Rick Insel, who is now the head coach at
Yeah,
MTSU,
yeah.
was our AAU coach.
Oh,
And
wow.
so many of us, like, they were at Tennessee, Vanderbilt, they were Kentucky, they were everywhere. And I'm sitting in Fresno in my dorm room watching them, and I'm like, I got to go back to where I'm going to have a chance to play in the NCAA tournament. And so I decided to transfer, and I transferred because I didn't understand at the time that when you transfer from D1 to D1, you have to sit out a year.
Mm,
So I found out that I could go to junior college and play for a year and then go back D1 because I'd already set out a year. I didn't want to sit out two with the transfer. So I went to Okaloosa Walton, which is where you know me from.
yeah, yeah.
I played at OW. It's now Northwest Florida State.
Yes, it
But I
is.
went to Okaloosa Walton and played there for a year. And
Wow.
that was the first year they ever started the program there. And we were just good. Like, we were a bunch of girls. I was on the team with a bunch of girls from Pensacola. And we just were balling and had the best experience. And I did really well. And then I transferred to Alabama,
Wow.
which I met Tommy. This is really going to trip you out. I met your brother Tommy through my cousin Antonio London, who also played at Alabama. Tommy brought Antonio home with him to Fort Walton Beach
Yes.
uh, during spring break. And so I
Wow.
was there at Okaloosa Walton in Niceville during that time. So me, Tommy, Antonio, George Teague. I don't know if you remember George
Yeah,
Teague.
I remember George.
Yes, we all hung out in Fort Walton Beach during Alabama's spring break, and that kind of sealed the deal for me that I was going to go to Alabama after that because I was like, my cousins there, I
Families.
know
Yeah,
people, yeah.
that is
So
awesome.
I transferred from the junior college after a year and went to Alabama. And from Alabama, I got into coaching. Troy State, West Virginia, Cal, Berkeley, Mississippi State,
Wow.
Tennessee. I was the head coach of a D2 school in Long Island, New York. I have traveled, I have been around, I've seen it all. My last job was at Tennessee. And after Tennessee, I kind of shortly before Tennessee, I started to think about how much longer I wanted to do the coaching thing.
Mm.
And um, I just didn't see myself at 55 years old running through airports trying to sign 17, 18-year-old kids anymore. I didn't see that for myself,
Yeah.
although I still love the game dearly. I do.
Wow.
But I just started to think about, like, as the children changed a little bit, as parenting changed a little bit, I started
Hmm.
to see the dynamics in sports shift in a way that, not that I couldn't come up to it, I just didn't agree with what I was being asked to come up to, if I can just
Mm.
be honest.
Yeah.
So I just kind of felt like it was time for me to do something different after Tennessee. It was time for me to just kind of go on to the next phase of my life. And also, too, I think from a spiritual standpoint,
Yeah.
it was that as well, because I had heard the voice of the Lord very clearly tell me in a game on the bench at Tennessee, "This is your last coaching job." And I'm looking
Mm.
around like, what? What? Like, no, it's supposed to go up from here. And God was like, no, this is it. So I coached for 18 years and then retired from it, really. And now I live in Savannah, Georgia. I do my podcast, These Three Things. I kind of came here for an executive recruiting job
Mm.
and decided that I didn't want to do that either. I kind of just wanted to go into business for myself. So I started a communications company called Sharrona Communications. And my podcast was the first venture in my brand. And so I'm adding other things to it now that I'm going to be excited to introduce this summer.
Wow.
So just kind of went out on my own.
We are on our way to Savannah in September. My wife and I do a marriage camp every year, and our place of choice this year is Savannah, Georgia. So we'll be down there at the West End,
Yes.
and
Okay.
so I have to let you know when we come that way.
Please do. I got some good spots for you to eat at for sure.
Awesome, awesome. So let's talk about your podcast. I'm so interested. I love to hear your experience and how you got to where you are. Your podcast is called These Three Things. I was curious. There's a scripture in First Corinthians. It talks about now remaineth these three things, and so as a preacher, I'm thinking about this. Okay, so what are the three things in the podcast?
Okay, it's funny that you say that because this whole podcast thing was never on my radar. Even though I did go to my degree at Alabama is communications, media, marketing, advertising, production. Those were all the things that I went to school to do.
Wow,
So when I retired from coaching, I had no idea that this was the lane that I would just naturally gravitate to. But the
wow.
Lord actually gave me the podcast.
Mm,
I didn't have any plans on doing the podcast. I had kind of come to Savannah, like I said, to take this job and went into work one day and I was like, I think this is my last day, and just on the spot told my boss, who I love dearly, was a great guy, that today's my last day. And I just kind of took some time off. And while I was taking time off, God had just kind of basically was like, how you've always had a passion to see, women of color be in better relationships with each other. It's time for you to put that on display. And I was like, oh no, God, I don't want to do that. Like that's too insurmountable. There's a lot of work that's going to need to be done. I'm not interested in that. And he was like, no, and you know how God is when he kind of tells you something, it's just a matter of time where you're going to eventually end up where he told you to go.
most definitely.
So um, I began to start thinking about it, and I was kind of trying to think of the name for the show. And I was in my car riding, and I was like, well, seven is God's perfect number. I said, well, maybe I can leave, because I knew that I wanted to do a podcast. I wanted it to be about women of color and our
Hmm.
relationships with each other, which I think eventually these three things will evolve to women, period. But my heart and the space that which I was led to start is with women of color.
Hmm.
Um, I was writing and I was like, okay, seven is God's perfect number. Maybe we can have seven takeaways at the end of each episode. Because what I didn't want to do is talk about problems and then end an episode and come back next week and talk about issues and end an
Right,
episode.
right.
I wanted to have takeaways from each episode that we could think about and consider in how to function differently with each other, be more grace minded, be more kind, give each other the benefit of the doubt more in relationships with each other. And so I just was like, no, I said 7 things is going to be kind of hard for a sister to remember each week, as I'm dropping episodes. 7 is going to be a lot of things. So I decided, I was just sitting there and all of a sudden I just said it out loud, these 3 things.
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, that's it. And so I called my sister, and all of this is actually on the introduction episode of my podcast. And I called my sister Christy, and she was like, I said, what do you think about the name? She said, I think it's great. She said, it represents the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And
I
I was
love
like,
it.
yes, like, and I had not shared with her at the time that the Lord had really given me this podcast to do and this work to do. So that's how it got its name, is these 3 things. It was really straight out of the, God's mouth into my ears, into my spirit, and, dropped it right in there. And I loved it when I said it out loud. I was like, that's it. So then, as I was still developing the podcast, I decided that I wanted to have a therapist on the podcast as well. I am a big proponent of therapy. I
Yeah.
think that, in the Black community, that's always been kind of stigmatized to a degree. We tend to keep our issues in house, and we're gonna pray everything away. And I'm all for prayer, but there are times when we need tools to know how to navigate different things that's going on in our lives. And
Yes.
so I wanted to have a therapist in the group, in the podcast, to come in, and when we talk about the deeper things, be able to break down from a deeper level why these things are so systemic in our culture, in our society. And I found a therapist who has been awesome, Dr. Patricia Thompson. She's out of Atlanta.
Mm.
She's heavy. She's, got her MBA. She's been in Harvard Review. She's been in so many different major magazines, Forbes, Inc. She's sharp.
Wow.
And just in a phone call, now this is where my recruiting ability comes in, Pastor
Uh-huh.
Chris. Because should I say bishop or
You,
pastor? Bishop.
Bishop, pastor, yes, whatever is
Chris,
fine.
let me say it right. Let me say it right. This is where my recruiting comes in, because I called Dr. Patricia on the phone. She and I had never met in person before. And after one phone conversation about my podcast, she was like, let's do it. So I told her, I said, I'm a recruiter by nature. I can recruit you into this show. So I kind of did. And it's just really been good. We've had some great episodes. We've talked about some great things. And the idea of why the Lord originally presented the podcast to me was because I was in coaching for 18 years
Mm-hmm.
around women, nothing but women,
Wow.
most of the time women of color. And our relationships were just not always the best in how we treated each
Mm.
other. Like I tell a story. I do a interview with Tina Thompson,
Mm-hmm.
who's WNBA legend, Hall of Famer in women's basketball, won 3 titles. I think Tina has 4 titles actually. And she was new to coaching. She had just retired from the WNBA,
Mm-hmm.
and she got the assistant coach's job at Texas. And she was on the road for the first time, meeting all these people, all these different coaches. And she walked into a room one morning. This was a game where all of us big schools were recruiting this one kid. So
Mm.
everybody that you could think of was in that gym, from Geno to from UConn to Stanford to Baylor to
Wow.
Tennessee to you name it. We're all in the gym. So she walks in and she says, "Good morning." And it was a room full of African American coaches, if I can just be honest.
Yeah.
I was the only person that spoke back to her. And later on that
Wow.
day, she saw me and she grabbed me and she was like, "Hey, what was that this morning?" I said, "That is the nature of our industry." I said, "We all think because we work at these different schools that we can't have relationships with each other because we're all so competitive." And I said, and I hate that. I said, because there's so many of us out here that
Mm.
we've got to be in better relationships with each other and be able to just say good morning. Although I know you're recruiting this kid, I'm recruiting this kid, the kid's going to go where they're ultimately going to go. That shouldn't affect how we move with each other.
Yeah.
And so it was just years of that. It was watching players, interactions with players, parents, interactions with coaches, just the relationship piece overall. It burdened me a lot.
Mm.
And sometimes I didn't know how to deal with it. So I'm positive I participated in that as well. But it had always been in my heart to see us be in better relationships with each other because we are better together, you know, as a country and as women, and especially as women of color,
Yeah.
So that's kind of really where the
That's a
podcast comes.
cultural. I believe that you're so spot on with that. That's a cultural, I guess, one of the cultural things we need to get better at as a people. It's not just in sports, in the world of sports. I see that in clergy. There's pastors in ministry. You see that with Black business owners and entrepreneurs. it's this idea of competition over collaboration.
Yes.
Where do you, I mean, how do we, in what you do, in the influencers and entrepreneurs and the women of color that you come in contact with, how do we, what are steps toward that you, in your opinion, us moving more of a into more of a collaboration, that like we understand that we can achieve more together, things like what we're doing right now. I mean, I feel like this is a collaboration. Like we're saying, okay, she's not just doing her thing and I'm doing my thing. How do we come together?
Well, I think for me, I use three words for um, three key words for my podcast that I kind of
Mm-hmm.
stand on when
Mm-hmm.
I do different advertisements or different media releases. It's support, unity, and kindness. And
Mm.
I feel like a lot of times we struggle to support each other in the Black community.
Wow.
Women struggle. We struggle to support each other. And, but we struggle, like, for example, when I was at West Virginia, there was a level of, everybody was, hey, baby, hey. A lot of people in coaching world know me as baby, some as Sharrona, whatever. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
hey, hey. The moment that I got the job at Tennessee, which seemingly to them is a step up, and in a lot of ways it is. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee. Don't
Mm-hmm.
get me wrong. Those same people were not as friendly. They were not as supportive. They were not, because we start to feel as if someone is advancing, then
Mm.
something's being taken away from us. When what we have to realize is when someone that we know is advancing, it should be making all of us feel better that more doors are going to be opening for the rest of us.
Come on
And if
now.
I do the right thing with my opportunity,
Yeah.
I'm going to be looking back to pull you up to make sure that
Yeah.
I'm opening the door for the rest of us. Unfortunately, what happens is some of us get to these positions and we're like, hey, you got to get it how you get it. I'm up here now and I work to get here and you got to figure it out for yourself. And that is the reason why we don't always support each other.
Wow.
And so in that, I try to just meet every woman of color that I see with kindness. I'm going to make you speak to me. I'm going to say hello. I'm going to compliment you on something because as Black women in general in the United States of America, there's a level of armor that we carry anyway,
Mm-hmm.
daily, in the workplace, in the community. There's a level of armor that we have to armor up with every day. And sometimes we forget to take it down with each other.
Mm.
Sometimes we feel like that it's necessary with each other. So I'm always looking to try to disarm a sister just so I can engage and have conversation with her. And then, talk about the support piece and talk about how unity in our community is so important to the growth of us overall. And talking about our stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's what I do on the podcast. I talk about our stuff, and I have a therapist there, like I said, to help us work through the deeper questions that we have about it and why systemically we still operate in things like colorism, like we
Mm.
still operate in, the crabs in the barrel mentality that we
Yeah.
all talk about.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I go about it, really.
Dr. Joy DeGruy talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome. She talked about the
Mm-hmm.
idea that after centuries of violence and centuries of trauma that has been induced from this country and stages of the history of this country onto Black people, that there's still some trauma we wrestle with, we struggle with, and that trauma is passed down from generation to generation, and how we raise our kids, how we interact with our families, how, and I see it so much in the communities that I pastor. Parents are parenting out of trauma. They've not even healed from the traumas of their childhood, and they're passing on a perpetual hurt and pain. And so you're so right. As we're dealing with this trauma, my heart goes out to all the Black ladies and women, my mom, my sisters, my wife, because I see the struggles, the shortages in positions and things you have to wrestle with. What has been, I know in your podcast, are you guys seeing that perpetual trauma in Black women, where you're having to, I guess you're seeing young girls being raised in hostile environments. You're seeing them, the fastest growing prison population right now is women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm like, man, there's a huge issue, and it's Black women.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking to myself, like, we've really got some work to do with our young ladies.
We do. We do. And I will be honest and say that I have seen an uptick in the negative space that women are being perceived in. But I've also realized by doing these three things podcast
Mm-hmm.
is that we're not aware that we're functioning out of trauma. We're not
Mm,
aware that a lot of this has been systemically passed down to us.
most
We're
definitely.
not even aware of it. So the first thing that we have to do is bring the awareness about of where do you think that of questioning our mentality about certain things when it comes to our own people and how we function with our own people.
Mm,
Where does that mindset come from? Why are we thinking that way?
mm,
Why are people who are struggling like us, who look just like us, are the people that we treat the worst? Like, let's break that down and start to give thought to why we're moving with each other the way we are and where that could have come from. And I think what I'm learning in the process of this podcast, interviewing people and having Dr. Patricia on the show as a doctor in her own right, sharing with me is that we have got to look at our trauma
mm.
and address it, and we've got to acknowledge that it has traumatized us and it's affected us from generation to generation to generation. And what's happening is these kids that are operating now are more exposed to a lot more than we were at their age. They
Yeah.
have cell phones at 6 and 7 years old. They have so much information in the palm of their hands that their knowledge and understanding of more adult things happened for them a lot earlier. And I also think that there's a level of trust that we've lost with
Mm.
today's children because we allow them to go to schools where their classmates can gun them down and murder them, and we make no laws to change the rules for that.
Wow.
We make no changes to protect them. That they now have to fight their own battles
Yeah.
as children in this country for their voices to be heard because the adults refuse to protect them. And
Wow.
so with that, we're creating young adults who mentally think they're ready for adult issues, but they're not. Physically may look like they're ready for adult issues, but they're not.
Mm.
And they're taking things in their hands like adults. And because a lot of times, depending on whether you're growing up in a single parent home and your dad is involved, a lot of these young girls are unprotected out here in the world.
Yes,
Mom's
they
got to
are.
work and pay bills, so they're walking around unprotected in a society that has made no efforts to protect them. So they have to protect themselves now. And that
Wow.
raises, depending on where you're growing up, a level of violence and a level of self protection that a lot of young girls, especially African American girls, are having to shoulder, when it's not their season to do that.
Mm.
And we know the justice system is harder on us. So whereas, a white kid could probably get in trouble for some of the same things that a black kid is getting in trouble for, we have documented evidence that the sentencing is always more difficult and harder on us. So,
Mm.
you know, that's kind of really what we're seeing. And the more we begin to talk about our trauma and in all areas of our black community, I have been led to work with women,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that in all areas of our culture in the black community, we
Uh-huh.
need to start addressing the trauma that we are truly dealing with. We are in a stage of trauma right now. We're being killed at the rates that we're being killed by police right now.
Yes.
You know, and I think that black people, we are so used to trauma that we don't even know we're experiencing it anymore. It's just a way of life for us. But it's causing us to act in certain ways, especially in our youth, that's damaging to their future.
That's it's so, and some people will never understand, even as much as we try to explain, some people will never understand the plight. You know, the array of challenges that African Americans have from all different angles. On one hand, here in Murfreesboro, there was a shooting just the other night of a young man, but this shooting didn't happen by the police. It happened. He was a very well known young man in our community, and one of the young men who goes to my church, he was, he used to live out in the streets, right? He lived the street life. And he said, I just can't understand. He said, this didn't happen. He said, he said this to me. He says, how do we expect them to respect us when we keep doing this to each other? Yep. And then, but it's a real issue with the police violence as well. So like you've got, it's coming from all of these angles. And it's like, man, we have the challenge of trying to pull ourselves up and demand the respect from others and find our place in society and the community in which we live in. It's almost W.E.B. Du Bois's double consciousness, so to speak. You know, I'm wrestling with these two things, African and American, and how do I be both? You know, and so it's definitely a challenge. And I hear the passion in your voice. Women need a space such as like your podcast, a space where we can come get conversation about these real issues. And I commend you for creating that space. Tell us how we can connect with your podcast and how a lady who's watching right now may be able to go on and listen.
Okay, I am on pretty much every podcast platform that you could listen to. If you have an iPhone, I'm on Apple Podcast. If you have an Android, I'm on Spotify. I was picked up in season 2 by iHeartRadio and Pandora, so you can also listen to me. If you have Pandora, just go to the podcast button, click it, and then type in these 3 things. My logo is a Black woman with a big afro sitting in a chair with a microphone. And you can listen to it from any one of those platforms. My website is www.these3-things.com. You can go on the website. You can read all about how the podcast got started. You can learn how to get in touch with me if you're interested in, dialoguing and talking more. You can email. I list books on my website that I think would be great for us to be reading in the community, that I think uplifts women and is good for us to listen to. I talk about people that I follow on Instagram, all positive people. So I have like 3 follows, 3 books to read. And then I ask my audience, 3 things that you'd like to hear me talk about on the show that are relevant to you. I sell merchandise on my website as well. But the biggest thing is I have a podcast page. So everyone who is on an episode is on the podcast page. So if you're interested in knowing more about them and reading about them or reaching out to them, everyone who's on the podcast will be on the podcast page. You click on the episode that they were on, and you can find out how to reach them through all their social medias, emails, and it just helps us stay connected, especially when you hear someone talking about something that is really relevant to you and you want to connect with that person. My guests have been really amazing about, if people want to reach out, I'm here. I want to talk and dialogue. So you can reach out to me in those ways. It's probably the best. Listen to the podcast, and I'm in the process of launching season 3 in a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
So I'm into my 3rd season already, which, you do podcasting, so you are aware of how much work podcasting is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
People think you just get in front of a microphone and have a conversation, but there's so much more that goes into podcasting than that.
Especially when you're producing it and creating. Yes, most definitely.
And editing. Do you do your own editing?
Do that? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, well, you know my pain.
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here right now mixing it all live so that I don't have to do much in post.
Good job. I got to get on your level then.
Well, listen, I thank you so much, everybody. This has been Miss Sharrona Reaves, and she is the creator, the producer of the These 3 Things podcast. Issues, my beautiful Black sisters, issues surrounding your lives. You need to go and check her out. I love what she is doing. And I'm going to put all of her information, her pages and things of that nature on the description of this video and tag her and everything, so you'll have direct links for that. Sharrona or Bebe, listen, I always like to give my guests the final say, so I want you to close us out in whatever thought you want to leave with us. It could be a prayer, it could be a motivational thought, whatever you want to leave us with. So everybody, I want to remind you again, I have a huge 2-day pastors camp for influencers or community leaders, ministry leaders coming up called Pastor Plus Camp, 2-day camp, where we're going to show you how to build your brand, how to get your message out, how to manage your Instagram page, grow your YouTube channel. All of that is coming June 24th, 25th. Go to my website, cajohnson.org. So the final thought is coming up here with Miss Sharrona.
Well, first of all, thank you, Bishop, for having me. I have known you for a long time, even when you were really young back then. So I'm not surprised that you didn't remember me. But what I challenge at the end of each episode and the women that I do shows with, I challenge them to take 7 days and evaluate yourself on how you're being with every other woman of color that you meet, that you run across, that you pass, that you walk by and pass. How are you being with your sister? And give serious thought as to why. If you find that, okay, I don't really speak, I don't really say hello, I don't really make eye contact, I'm really not that friendly, I'm kind of standoffish, I kind of look at people hard, I give them the up and down. We need to begin as Black women to evaluate how we're moving and functioning with each other. Take 7 days and evaluate yourself. Each person that I have challenged to do that has always reached back out to me and said, I got a lot of work to do. I never even thought about some of these things until you challenged me with them, and how if we're all perpetuating these armors with each other, how will we ever be able to support each other, walk in unity, and just be kind to one another? So that is my challenge to all of, women of color, Black women that are listening to this episode. Check yourself for 7 days and locate yourself. We can change anytime we want to. Our minds can be renewed daily if necessary. But at the end of the day, we're going to be stronger and better together. And we need each other. We need each other. Our community, we all need each other. But Black women, we definitely need each other.
Awesome. Well, everybody, you heard it right there. Miss Sharrona Reaves. Go to her page. Go check out her podcast. This has been an episode of Pastor Plus. I'm Bishop Chris Johnson, a.k.a. The Greatness Coach, signing off until we meet again. God bless you.